Gianna, a 28-year-old nurse, sat at a small table in her small kitchen, surrounded by unpaid bills and job postings. She sighed, feeling the weight of loneliness and responsibility weighing down on her shoulders. With light brown hair and bright green eyes, Gianna exuded a determination that belied her frail appearance. Raised in an orphanage, she was completely on her own, with no family to rely on. "I need to find a job soon," she told herself as she flipped through the job postings. In the past few days, Gianna had been feeling dizzy more and more, and her body was growing weaker. With no money for medical treatment, she needed to find a job quickly. It was as if her last prayers had been answered when her phone rang with an unsaved number. Gianna answered, hoping it might be a response from the countless job applications she had sent out. On the other end of the line was a strong and authoritative female voice. "Good afternoon, my name is Carly. I am looking for a nurse to take care of my husband. Your name was referred to us." Gianna was surprised. "I don't remember applying for this position, but I am very interested in the job as a caregiver." She tried to keep her composure so as not to appear too desperate. "My husband, Mr. Gregg, has heard about your services. We urgently need someone with your experience." Carly interrupted, "Gianna, can you come to the villa today for an interview?" Not believing her luck, Gianna quickly agreed, "Yes, of course I will come." When she arrived at Gregg's villa, a magnificent and impressive place, Gianna was greeted by Carly, a woman with a straightforward appearance and a calculating expression. During the interview, Carly did not show any real concern for her husband's health. Gregg was diagnosed with a rare disease. The doctors said he only had a few months to live. "I believe the medical professionals exaggerated the severity, not the seriousness of the matter." Gianna felt a little sympathy for Gregg, but she didn't like the way Carly talked about her husband, as if his life didn't matter. "I'm sorry to hear that. I'd like to see Gregg if I could," Gianna said, trembling at the thought that his wife might harm her husband. She hoped it wasn't true. Before the interview could continue, a man dressed in gardening clothes suddenly entered the room, interrupting the conversation. When Carly saw the man, she looked at him with disdain. "You have no eyes. Get out of here right now." The gardener looked embarrassed, his shoulders slumped under the reprimand. "I'm sorry, Carly. I won't do it again," he apologized when he noticed Gianna's worried gaze. "Please forgive me for interrupting." Gianna felt uncomfortable with the situation and looked at the man with pity, but she remained focused on her goal of checking on Gregg. She was worried that his wife might be mistreating him without anyone knowing. "Maybe you should meet Gregg before you do anything," Gianna insisted, worried that his wife might be mistreating her husband without anyone knowing. Gianna barely had time to introduce herself when she realized something was wrong. They found Gregg lying on the bed, coughing violently, breathing heavily, his face completely pale and looking too thin, as if he had not been properly cared for. Gianna rushed over, adjusting his position to help him breathe easier and patting his back. "You can't breathe," she whispered, quickly taking control of the situation. Carefully, Gianna leaned over him a little, afraid that he might lose his life. She began to perform chest compressions until Gregg began to breathe again, gasping for air. Gianna was grateful for the time and relieved to have entered the room before the worst happened. "Are you okay?" Gianna asked worriedly. After the crisis passed, Gregg was still gasping for air but managed a weak smile. "Thank you, you're an angel," he said in a weak voice. The man had a pale face and looked too thin, as if he hadn't been properly cared for. "I'm okay now," he whispered, his green eyes seemingly taking in everything around him. Gianna was touched that she had saved him, but she worried, "Are you getting enough to eat? Are they taking care of you properly?" she thought to herself, feeling guilty for thinking so badly of his wife. "Glad to see you're okay, Mr. Gregg," she replied, smiling at him. Carly, who had been watching from the door, looked uncomfortable. "It seems like you did a good thing, Gianna," she said, her tone as if she wished the worst for her husband. "However," she continued, "I believe I can take care of my husband myself." Mr. Gregg, angered by his wife's attitude, spoke up, "Gianna, I want you to take this job because you saved my life." Though relieved to have helped, Gianna sensed the gravity of the situation and replied, "I will do my best to take care of Mr. Gregg." She looked at his wife, Carly, and suggested, "If you don't mind, I would like a full-time position and a small place in the mansion so I can take better care of him." Carly, seemingly worried not only about Gregg's critical condition but also about maintaining her power in the family, agreed. "Stay as long as you want, Gregg," with a grateful look in his eyes, said, "Stay in our best guest room, at least I can thank you for what you have done," he ordered, and from then on, Gianna was placed in the luxurious guest room of the villa. 3 weeks later, Gianna had gotten used to the routine of taking care of Greg, but each day she felt weaker and sicker. "I need to earn more money to go to the doctor, maybe if I can find a part-time job during the holidays," she thought, but she could not leave Greg for fear that his condition would worsen. "I will take care of myself as soon as he is well," she decided. As she moved through the vast and majestic corridors of the villa, carrying a tray of essential medicines and medical instructions, Gianna strictly followed the instructions, but Greg's condition worsened, as did her own. In the difficult moments, it was Greg's condition that gave Gianna the strength to carry on. "He needs me," she told herself as she climbed the stairs with difficulty. When she entered Greg's spacious room, she found him finishing a phone call. His voice was soft as a breath of wind. As soon as he ended the call, he looked straight into her eyes, a look that was urgent in his weakness. The call seemed important because his eyes were worried. "Gianna," he began, his voice only breaking the silence. "This could be my last day." The weight of his words hung in the air, signaling a warning or a farewell. Quickly, Gianna moved to his side, placed the tray of medicine next to the bed, and tried to absorb the weight of the moment. In the dim light of the quiet room in the old mansion, Gianna stood by Greg's hospital bed, her eyes fixed on the medicine tray lying beside her. The familiar pills were there, but a strange bottle of pills and 2 unsorted envelopes caught her attention. Gianna remembered all the documents and medicines that Carly had left behind every day to take care of Greg. She knew for sure that these items had not been there the day before. "Do you know what this is?" Gianna asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Carly had always been careful with any documents related to Greg's health. Greg, weakened by the amount of medication he had to take every day, quickly replied, "These are important medicines and documents for what's to come. I asked a trusted friend to put them on the tray." The nurse, confused but determined, stood opposite her. "Why is this here? Is there anything I can do to help you?" Greg, in a weak but emotional voice, opened his hands to thank Gianna. "Gianna, you have brought light to my dark days. But there is one last thing you can do for me." Gianna was surprised. "What?" "Pretend to be my daughter. I don't want to go without anyone by my side." Greg interrupted in the middle of a coughing fit, leaving Gianna worried. "Please let me be your father for a day. This is very important to me," he continued, his eyes tense. "Why are you asking this, Greg?" Gianna, not understanding the reason for the request, tried to convince him. "You will be fine. I believe you will improve." But Greg could only mumble, "This is my last request, Gianna. I don't have much time left." As he began to cough more violently, Gianna did not hesitate and quickly approached to take care of him. "I'm going to pretend to be Greg's father," she said softly, her heart breaking at his plea. Before Greg could explain further, the door to the room suddenly opened. Greg's wife, Carly, strode in with a determined stride, followed by a man dressed smartly in a well-tailored suit. "It's time," Carly announced, her voice cutting through the intimacy of the moment. "I need you to sign the will. I've hired a lawyer to help with the paperwork." Gianna felt the tension in the air. She turned to Greg with questions filled with suspicion. "So why did you ask me to pretend to be your daughter so I wouldn't have to sign these papers?" Before Gianna could ask, Greg coughed harder, breathing heavily. Carly, with a cold demeanor as if she had been playing a long, calculated game, focused on Greg's worsening condition. "You need to sign these papers now," she demanded, pushing the wills toward him. Greg, despite his frail state, looked at Carly with understanding and acceptance. "Carly, even in my condition, is this the most important thing to you?" he said, his voice choked with frustration and sadness. Gianna felt dizzy, but she couldn't let herself lose control. When the health monitors started to go off, Gianna couldn't understand what was happening. "What's going on?" she screamed as she tended to Greg, momentarily forgetting all other thoughts. Carly, realizing the gravity of the situation, moved closer to Greg and insisted that signing the will could not be delayed. Greg tried to raise his hand to sign, but his strength waned as his consciousness began to waver. "Carly, he muttered before his hand gave out and his head fell back. Gianna hurriedly grabbed the resuscitation equipment, relying on her nursing skills. I'll pretend to be you to protect Greg. She tried to calm herself, though her heart was breaking at the heartbreaking request. However, before Jian could act, the door was pushed open by Carly, causing the equipment to fall to the floor. "Get out of the room now. You left him in this condition," Carly yelled, pointing at the door. Despite the threat, Jian refused to give up. "No, I need to save him," she told herself, her determination unshakable. While Carly angrily told Jian to leave, Jian couldn't stand to watch Greg die. With trembling hands, she reached for the unclassified medicine, making a desperate decision. "Greg, please stay with me," she prayed softly, hoping her words would bring him hope. Carly looked at Jian with shock and anger. "What do you think you're doing? Let me handle it," she challenged, but Jian was too focused on saving Greg's life. Even though he knew that this injection might be the only way to save him, Jian felt anxious as Greg's condition only worsened. In that moment, Jian felt the weight of guilt weighing down on her. "I'll have the guards show you to the door," Carly said, leaving the room with the lawyer, taking advantage of the opportunity when Jian and Mr. Greg were alone in the room. Jian quickly tucked the documents she had presented earlier into her uniform pocket, before Mr. Greg's wife returned. "Wait, I'll find a way to help you," she said to the clearly stressed patient as one of the guards appeared, beginning to lead her out with a factory worker. Jian's head was spinning not only from the emotional turmoil but also from the sudden dizziness that almost made her fall. She felt like every step required a great deal of effort. "Hurry," the guard muttered. "I just want to save him," Jian thought to herself before the guard pushed her, sending her falling to the sidewalk of the mansion. She felt weak as the world seemed to spin around her. The guard abandoned her as if she were unimportant and returned inside without a second thought. After the tense confrontation with Carly and Greg's health crisis, Jian felt weak and confused, leaning against the grass to avoid fainting. In that vulnerable moment, the gardener appeared, offering a helping hand. "Are you okay?" His voice was gentle, in stark contrast to his rustic appearance. "I'm fine, Greg's just getting worse," Jian replied, noticing the kindness in the man's eyes. As Jian leaned against the gardener to stand, she heard the distant sound of an ambulance siren approaching. The ambulance that had arrived in time to attend to Greg had finally arrived. The initial panic gave way to fierce determination. "I need to go to the hospital," she whispered rather than said to the gardener. The thought of leaving Greg alone in his most critical moment unbearable. He had no one else, his wife didn't care about him. Jian knew Carly wouldn't let her go with the ambulance, so she walked slowly to the taxi stand, fighting the dizziness and weakness that threatened to overtake her. Each step was difficult, but Jian had been tired for weeks and now she had to get to Greg without collapsing. She hopped into the taxi, leaning back in the back seat as she tried to gather her strength. Her eyes followed the uniform where she had hidden the unopened envelopes. "Please God, there's something useful inside," she prayed, her voice urgent. Driven by her desire to save the patient, she breaks the seal of the envelope and finds a positive paternity test result, proving the existence of an unknown child of Greg's. And a detailed report showing that this person has the same rare disease that now threatens the wealthy man's life. There is no name on the test result, nothing to indicate how Jian could find Greg's child. "Who is this child?" she whispers to herself, a growing sense of anxiety slowly taking over her mind. When she arrives at the hospital, Jian runs to the front desk, panting and her heart racing with the urgency of the situation. "I need to see a patient. His name is Greg," she says in a desperate voice. The receptionist, a woman with a calm exterior, looks at Jian with a mixture of sympathy and professional formality. "I'm sorry, only family members are allowed to see him at this time," she replies, maintaining the efficiency the situation demands. Jian hesitated, faced with a heavy moral dilemma, remembering Greg's last request to pretend to be his daughter. A risky decision formed in her mind with the paternity test results still in hand. She took a deep breath and lied, "I am his daughter, these papers prove it. I need to see you immediately," urgently she said, extending the documents to prove her statement. Luckily, the test results did not indicate the child's gender. The receptionist quickly reviewed the papers before nodding, allowing Jian inside. "Please follow me," she said, leading Jian down the seemingly endless hallways. Following behind the receptionist, Jian felt each step an echo of her inner uncertainty. Am I doing the right thing, she wondered. The weight of her decision to lie weighed heavily on her conscience, but her desire to be by Greg's side in his most critical moment and fulfill her promise not to let him face the darkness alone gave her strength. When she finally reached Greg's room, Jian hesitated at the window, afraid of what she might find. Taking a deep breath, she entered and was confronted with the sight of the wealthy man hooked up to multiple machines, each beep a reminder of the fragility of life. Jian found Greg lying on a bed, on a ventilator, and looking very frail. Beside the bed was a doctor writing down the patient's medical condition on a clipboard. Jian moved closer, her heart aching with grief and guilt. The nurse could barely speak. "Mr. Gregg, this is Jian. I'll be there as soon as I can," she whispered, knowing there would be no response. The coldness of her hand against his made her swallow hard. Greg's words about pretending to be his daughter echoed in her head. "I'm your daughter, doctor. Can you tell me how he is doing?" she asked. The doctor looked at her intently. Jian hated to lie again, but it was necessary. The doctor took a deep breath before answering. "Mr. Gregg is in a deep coma. As it stands, he is unlikely to survive the day." Each word the doctor spoke shattered Jian, echoing in the silence, leaving a heavy void in her chest. In that moment, the reality of life and death became painfully clear. "He can't go this way," she thought to herself before turning to the doctor. "I need to be alone with him, like your father." She approached the bed where Mr. Gregg lay motionless, the sound of machines filling the space between them. Once the doctor left, Jian sat in the armchair next to the bed. "Mr. Gregg, I haven't forgotten my promise," she began, her voice shaking with restrained emotion. "I will grant your last wish, as you requested. Today I will be your daughter," Jian said, holding Greg's hand through his tears. "If we were father and daughter, we would spend a day at the beach together, unhindered by illness, sharing stories and laughter, having a morning full of strength and joy, ending the afternoon with a cup of coffee by the sea. This would be our dream day." Her words were hopeful and sad, bringing comfort and a glimpse of happiness. Suddenly, the door to the room opened abruptly, breaking the silence with the unexpected appearance of Carly. Her presence instantly made the space cold and calculating. Her eyes stared at Jian with clear contempt. "What do you think you are doing?" Carly demanded, her voice cutting sharply through the air. "I've made it clear, but you seem to have trouble understanding. You're fired, Jian. I want you away from my husband." Despite the fatigue and weakness threatening to overtake her, Jian stood up and faced Carly with determination. "You can't fire me. I'm his daughter," she lied, pulling the envelope open with difficulty. Jian knew that lying to Carly was dangerous, but she had no choice but to leave the man alone with the wife who seemed to wish for his death. Carly wasn't surprised by the revelation or the obvious lie. In fact, she sneered, a hard sound that seemed out of place in the environment of life and death. "You're his daughter? That's ridiculous. Look at you, your appearance, your clothes. You can never be part of our family." She said it with disgust, every word dripping with contempt that made Jian feel even smaller. The nurse, however, did not back down. "It doesn't matter what you think," she said. Summoning the last of her strength, she said determinedly, "I will stay here. He is not alone." The heated argument between the two women was interrupted by the sudden appearance of the medical team called by Carly. "This woman is disturbing the peace of the patient. I demand that she be taken away immediately," Carly ordered, criticizing Jian for trying to reach Greg. Gan felt violently dizzy and collapsed, whispering about her determination not to leave as she fell. She saw Greg's fingers move, a sudden sign of life. "He's moving," she said weakly, as the doctors rushed to help. Carly asked them to ignore her. "This girl is nothing but a nuisance. She has no money to pay for her services," Carly said. Those were the last words Gan heard before losing consciousness. Sometime later, Gan woke up in a hospital room, bathed in dim light. She felt the urgency coursing through her veins. When she saw the expensive hospital environment, she thought, "I can't stay here. I can't afford a hospital like this." She tried to ignore the dizziness and removed the IVs from her arms, determined to overcome the pain. She tried to sit up, but her body resisted, her muscles groaning with resistance. When she turned in bed, she saw her bag and the envelope containing Greg's test results on the chair. "Some nurse must have left my things here," she whispered weakly to herself. She needed to act, and every second she lost was one less moment to save Greg. Grabbing the envelope and the phone, she dialed the number of the Institute of Pharmacy written on the paper with trembling hands. she gasped with anticipation. The call was answered quickly, and Gan was immediately transferred to a pharmacist. Pharmacy Institute, this is Dr. Patrick. How can I help you? A man said on the line. Gina, this is Gan, Greg's nurse. He is very sick and in the hospital. I found your number in the test he did. I don't know what to do, but I need to help him, she said, feeling tired but trying to keep her voice at a clear level. Ah, Gan, I know Greg's condition. I need you to stay close to him. It's important that he's not left alone. We need to make sure he's safe now. Can you do that? Dr. Patrick asked, increasing Gan's anxiety. She tried to get up from the bed, but her legs were still weak. Tell me what's going on. I need to know what I can do, she argued, afraid that her absence might have cost the patient his life. Mr. Greg is participating in a study to cure a rare disease, the disease that has sickened him. It's a revolutionary program, but it's still in its final testing phase. I hope the results of the study will be completed today so I can continue the program, Dr. Patrick explained, his voice conveying the gravity of the situation. I know I won't have time to save Greg, but I will still fight until the last moment. Gan thought to herself, trembling, I need to be with him. I can't stay in this room, she concluded, struggling to stand. Her legs burned, but she gathered strength with each step, determined to make her way down the hallway. I'll be there, Greg. Hold on, she whispered to herself, walking quickly through the hospital corridors, carrying Greg's files. Please God, keep me strong until I can get to Greg before Dr. Patrick does, no matter what happens to me. When Gan reached Greg's room, she was greeted by a scene of intense medical activity, doctors and nurses surrounding the patient's bed, each expressing urgency and concern through their actions and interrupted conversations. Through it, she understood that Greg was in critical condition, and all the doctors seemed to be saying something worrying. We're going to lose this patient. There's no saving him, one of the doctors said, making Gan's heart feel heavy. What's going on? Gan managed to ask in a worried voice as she approached, despite the weakness that threatened to make her fall again. He was improving a few minutes ago, but now he's getting worse, one of the doctors explained, his voice drowned out by the sirens and warnings from the monitors. We're losing him. Gan looked at Greg, taking in his pale skin and the obvious struggle with his breathing. The look reawakened the desperation in her heart, the fear of losing someone who had become so important to her in such a short time. Please do something, Gan begged the doctors, her voice choked with emotion. Don't let him die. One of the doctors, the team leader, turned to Gan with a grave expression that reflected the gravity of the situation. Your patient is in a very delicate condition. We are doing everything we can, but you need to understand that. No, Gan interrupted, the strength in her voice surprising everyone around her, including herself. Don't tell me to understand. If there is any chance, no matter how small, of saving him, you have to try. But her vision began to blur again. The doctor watched her for a moment before leaving Greg and walking towards her. We are trying, but we need to take care of you too. You are in a critical condition, he said, but Gan cut him off. Forget about me. The most important thing is him. I would never forgive myself if anything happened to me, she argued, her vision beginning to blur again. You can't just abandon him. There's always something to try, there's always a way. The doctor slowly took the blood pressure cuff a step further away from Gan. We understand your concern, but we have to be realistic about his capabilities, he said. Your patient knows about his condition. I'm sure he wants us to take care of him. Your pharmaceutical institute is a well-known supplier, and I believe they'll understand the situation. Gan tried to step back, holding up her hand to signal the doctor to pay attention to Greg. He's more than just a patient to me, really. Greg believed in me when no one else did, gave me a reason to keep fighting. How can I abandon him now? She said, feeling increasingly weak. However, the lack of medication began to take its toll on her, and Gan felt her vision completely blur, a wave of weakness overwhelming her body. Please save him. She whispered her final words before feeling the ground close in, as darkness enveloped her once more. A few days later, Gan awoke in a new hospital room, struggling to open her eyes and blink against the blinding light that filled the unfamiliar space. Her body still felt weak, but there was a steadfast fire in her heart that could not be extinguished. The memories of the recent battle and the deep feelings she had for Greg still lingered, pushing her to find a way to continue helping him through this critical ordeal. Oh, where am I? What happened to Greg? Gianna wondered, trying to remember everything before she lost consciousness. As a nurse, Gianna was familiar with the hospital environment and realized that this was not the hospital she had left with Greg. Surely they had realized that she could not afford to be admitted here, she thought. Wherever she was, Gianna knew she was strong. Her muscles no longer ached as before. She felt completely healthy, no longer in pain. However, this strength made it difficult for her to stand up easily. She could feel the difference in her body compared to before. Gianna pressed the call button to summon the doctor, her eyes scanning the room for any hospital staff. An elegant man entered the room, and when he saw that Gianna was awake, he smiled brightly. "Gianna, I'm glad you're awake," he said. "This is Dr. Patrick." He approached the bed. "I am Greg's trusted physician and his pharmacist. We spoke on the phone." "Dr. Patrick, how is Greg?" Gianna asked, her voice filled with concern. The man smiled reassuringly. "Everything will be explained clearly when the attending physician comes to see you." Dr. Patrick tried to reassure her, but Gianna's anxiety only grew. "I don't know how to thank you for all you have done for my friend Greg. You have sacrificed your health to ensure he gets treatment. People like you are rare," Gianna. Dr. Patrick praised. However, his words were interrupted when another doctor entered the room. Gianna immediately began to ask questions about Greg's condition, but the doctor's attention was focused on her. "You're in excellent health thanks to the medications," he said, checking her heart rate monitor. "I can't afford to stay in this hospital," Gianna replied, looking at the two men. "I'm unemployed right now," she said, worried about losing her job, not knowing what had happened, hoping Greg was fine and had found another nurse to care for him with the same care she had given him. Dr. Patrick reassured her, "Don't worry about the bills. The hospital will cover everything due to your excellent care of Greg. As for your job, come here, there's something you need to see when you get discharged." Gianna's curiosity was piqued, but she didn't want to get her hopes up about finding a job quickly, especially since Carly was having trouble giving her a letter of recommendation. "I'll figure out how to solve all the troubles in life after I finish some certification exams," Gianna told herself. Finally, Gianna was discharged from the hospital and went with Dr. Patrick to Greg's mansion. "Did you bring me here to get my luggage?" Gianna asked Patrick before facing the house that had been her refuge during her most difficult times. "No, actually, someone is waiting for you inside," Dr. Patrick said with a smile. "I'll be back later. I need to check on a project the institute is working on." After saying thanks and goodbyes, Gianna headed to the mansion with a worried face. However, when she opened the living room door, she was surprised to see Greg standing there, smiling at her. "I can't believe it," she said, her face filled with joy. "Oh my God, thank you," she prayed, unable to believe her eyes when she saw her patient healthy and able to walk. "Tell me how this happened," Gianna asked as Greg approached her. In all the months she had worked for him, Gianna had never seen Greg walk, always confined to bed due to his serious illness. "I can't believe what I'm seeing. You're walking," she cheered as she waited for him to come closer. When Greg was happy to be able to walk on his own with quick steps, he approached her and hugged her for a long moment. "You saved me more than you can imagine," Greg said, his voice strong and commanding. "But there's more to our story than you know," he continued, his voice low and serious, causing Gianna to take a step back, confused by the seriousness in Greg's eyes. "Why do you seem so worried?" she wondered, before smiling at him. "So tell me," she said, trying to understand but with more questions in her mind. "Who are your children? Did you save them?" Greg took a deep breath, his eyes filled with emotion as he looked at Gianna. "I actually have a daughter," he said, making Gianna sigh in relief at his smile. "I didn't know who she was until the day my health gave out. It took a while to get the test results, but yes, I saved her," Greg said, making Gianna sigh in relief before smiling at him. "I'm so happy to see her in front of me, healthy and smiling at me," Greg finished the story, causing surprise to spread across Gianna's face. She couldn't hide her surprise, not believing what she was hearing. What did you say?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I think I heard wrong." Greg smiled before saying, "You're my daughter, Gianna." "My daughter." He was happy to say those words, pulling Gianna into his arms. "How is this possible?" she asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're talking about the request I made to pretend to be her daughter?" Gianna asked, hoping it wasn't a joke, since her biggest dream was to have a family. Greg smiled, but it was a sad smile. "You're my daughter, Gianna?" I asked you to pretend because I thought I was going to die. I didn't want you to suffer having a father only to lose me right away. I found out that you'd spent your whole life in an orphanage dreaming of finding your father. I couldn't reveal the truth on my deathbed." Greg said, his circumstances making it impossible for him to tell the truth. "I'm sorry for hiding it." Gianna struggled to process the revelation, Greg's words slowly opening up deep emotions she never knew she had. "And your mother?" Gianna asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "What happened to your mother? Why didn't you know you were my father?" Greg lowered his gaze, showing sadness. "Unfortunately, your mother didn't love me. We were married, but she was never happy with me. She left without saying goodbye to live with another man. I didn't know that when she ran away she was pregnant with your child. If I had known, things would have been different. You were sent to an orphanage when you were born, but your mother didn't live long after that." Greg paused, as Gianna began to cry. "I wish things could be different, too," Gianna said, feeling sad about her mother's story. Greg looked at her with deep sympathy. "I know how you feel, Gianna. The loss and loneliness you've gone through is irreparable. But now, we can start over," he said softly. Gianna felt her heart melt, emotions she had never felt before. "I don't know what to say," she sighed, trying to hold back the tears. "I just want a family, a real father for me," she continued, her voice shaking. Greg gently stroked her hair, his eyes full of affection. "And now, we can be a family, Gianna. I will always be here to care for you and love you," he promised. Greg walked towards his daughter, Gian, with sure steps and took her into his warm arms. "Finally, I have a real family. I thank God every minute for this gift," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Gian, although happy, was filled with unanswered questions. "Dad, how did you know I was your daughter?" Greg became serious, his eyes shining with determination as he began to explain. "When Carly learned that I was sick, she started investigating to see if there was someone I had to share a legacy with. However, she did not tell me about the existence of your daughter, but in a moment of crisis, I went to get medicine and saw your picture, and I immediately knew you could be my daughter because you had the face of your mother when she was your age. So I hired a detective to look for you. When the detective found you, I was still not sure if we were related. So I hired you because I was afraid you had the same disease and would be lonely." Gian listened to his father's every word, feeling a mixture of joy and surprise. "But Carly didn't want to hire you, probably because she was afraid I would find out the truth, and she kept it all from me. It took me a while to accept that she would do that, thinking she would have lied to protect me if you weren't my daughter. But I saw that she always wanted you fired, and I didn't let her. While waiting for the test results, I didn't realize you were sick too because you hid the pain to take care of me." Greg paused, his voice filled with tears of emotion. Gian looked down, feeling ashamed and trembling. "I didn't want you to worry about me," she said, her voice full of regret. "You're an angel in my life, Dad, but I want to know everything about you." Greg smiled softly, his eyes filled with trust. "But back to what happened, I asked my medical team to find a cure to save you in case you got sick. So I asked them to find a cure before worrying about the blood relationship test, because that didn't matter. I've treated you like a child before. I also treat you like a family member." Gian smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I took care of him like I knew he was my father." She thought about all the days she had cared for him with love, happy that she could be of use to him. Greg became serious as he revealed everything to his daughter. "When the test results came back, I didn't have time to tell you about the DNA without upsetting you because I would have died soon after. Also, the tests revealed that Carly had medicated me to make me worse and took my assets." Greg wiped away his tears, trying to keep his composure from the shocking revelations. "The discovery about Carly has devastated me, but it has also strengthened my resolve to protect you, my only true heir." Gian, still processing the flood of information, felt a mixture of emotions: relief at finally understanding her origins, but also anger and sadness at Carly's machinations. "So what do we do with Carly now?" she asked with concern. Greg looked at Gian with determination, his eyes burning with determination. "Dr. Patrick took a blood sample while I was recovering in the hospital, so we have proof of what Carly did. Her lawyers were ready to have me sign her will and let her take my inheritance, but while you were in the hospital, she was arrested. Now justice has been served and Carly will not go unpunished for her evil actions." Gian asked worriedly, "But what about your illness? Is the cure that Dad said is certain? Greg smiled slightly, his eyes flashing with hope. Our medical team has found a cure. The drug you gave me is being tested as part of that effort. Thank God it saved you. I knew in my condition there would be no time for the cure to work, but by giving me the drug, you saved me too. My daughter, we are cured. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Jian felt a wave of relief and joy flood her heart. That's great, so there's hope for both of us, she asked with a smile through her tears. Yes, I booked both of us flights when you get out of the hospital, Greg replied, smiling at her. Can you hear me while you're in a coma? Jian, filled with emotion, nodded. Yes, Dad, I will do everything to make sure we have a special day at the beach and many happy days to come. Jian looked at his father with eyes full of gratitude and love. Thank you for everything, Dad. Greg was touched to be called Dad for the first time. I should be the one thanking you, my daughter. I am so happy to have you in my life. Meanwhile, Dr. Patrick watched quietly from afar, feeling happy to see Gianna find joy and hope in life again. He knew that his job was not only to cure diseases but also to help people find happiness and meaning in life. As night fell, the lights from inside the villa created a cozy and affectionate space, witnessing the dreamlike reunion between father and daughter. In the days that followed the emotional revelations, Greg and Jian worked together not only to strengthen their newfound family bond but also to face the legal challenges brought by Carly. Justice was served and Carly was sent to prison, paying the price for her evil schemes to steal Greg's fortune and damage his health. Greg's health improved dramatically thanks to the medical innovations his company had developed. He kept his promise to Jian, and father and son spent a memorable day at the beach celebrating not only Greg's recovery but the new life ahead. It was a day filled with laughter, deep conversations, and plans for the future, marking the beginning of many special moments they would share as father and daughter. Jian, in his new role at Greg's Institute of Medicine, has leveraged his experience as a nurse to train other nurses to recognize signs of abuse in the family environment that go beyond physical injuries. Jian's lectures have helped many professionals become more attentive and effective in identifying patients who are suffering in silence, transforming them into stronger advocates for the vulnerable. This new focus has not only raised the Institute's profile in the medical field, but has positioned Jian as a key figure in the fight against family abuse and neglect. Using his own traumatic personal experience as motivation for change, Greg, now healthier and inspired by his daughter's resilience and compassion, has dedicated a significant portion of the Institute's resources to supporting this cause. He has established awareness programs and partnered with organizations committed to protecting patients' rights under the leadership of Jian and Dr. Patrick. The Institute also began developing new policies to ensure patients received care in a safe and welcoming environment, setting a new standard of care in the industry. Jian's work quickly became recognized beyond the Institute, as she received invitations to attend health and wellness conferences and events, where she shared not only her professional findings but also her personal story, touching many hearts and inspiring others to join her fight. As father and daughter Jian and Greg rebuild their lives with mutual respect, admiration and love that transcends all the challenges of the past, they find joy in the little things, celebrating each victory together. Together they build a strong relationship, based on trust and a deep understanding of each other, promising a bright and happy future.